Okay, let's pick up with Second Kings 18. Now, Second Kings 18 comes after Second Kings 17. And what's happened in Second Kings 17 is the deportation of Israel by the Assyrians. Now, remember your geography because this is going to have a pretty profound effect on Judah. The kingdom of Israel is in the north, and the capital city is Samaria. The Assyrians have conquered it, and they have simply rounded up the people of Israel and deported them off to their land. Now, we come a little further south, and something else gets the attention of the Assyrians, and that is the city of Jerusalem, the capital of the city of Judah. Now, Shalmaneser is the king of Assyria when Israel falls, but now Sennacherib is king of Assyria when the Assyrian forces begin to gather onto Jerusalem. So, what's the big deal about the Assyrians? Well, Assyria is bad news. And here's why. If you look at the accounts of the worst atrocities committed by humans against other humans in history, whether it's the Nazi Einsatzgruppens that came into occupied areas of Eastern Europe to exterminate Slavs and Jews and others. You look at the atrocities committed during the purges under Stalin, or those things done by the Soviet secret police and so on. Or you come up to the modern times and you look at the way Islamic State has brutally treated its prisoners. The Assyrians were as bad as any of those, and possibly worse. So when the Assyrians came knocking at your door, this was serious business. They were a powerful military force, very well trained, very well disciplined, very experienced in siege warfare. And to resist them was to be subjected to really despicably revolting cruelties that would be inflicted on the people of any city that resisted them. So when Hezekiah, who is king of Judah, gets word that the Assyrians have arrived, he is very rightfully very, very, very alarmed and concerned because the Assyrians don't like to take no for an answer. And of course, Hezekiah has been keeping up with current events, and the whole nation of Israel has just been swept away before them. And now Sennacherib has come down south to Judah to demand the surrender of the city of Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. And at first, Sennacherib demands tribute, and Hezekiah pays it up. And so he pays up a goodly bit of whatever gold can be found in Jerusalem is sent out to Sennacherib. But it's not enough. Sennacherib wants to take the city. And so Sennacherib sends out, I think, one of the more interesting foreigners that you'll meet in the Bible. He is going to send out the Rabshakeh. Some versions of the Bible call Rabshakeh the field officer. What he really is the psychological operations officer of the Assyrian army. And his job is to destroy the morale of the people inside the city of Jerusalem before the attack, and to try to take away their will to fight. And psychological operations has been a part of military history for, well, let's say at least as far back as 722 BC, give or take a few years when this event is taking place. And so Rabshakeh goes out to discourage the people of Judah, and he has a meeting here with the people of with Hezekiah's servants who are standing here on top of the walled city of Jerusalem, and Rabshakeh is down here basically saying, "You can't win," but it's actually a good bit more subtle than that. For example, Rabshakeh says, "Oh, you have Egypt for an ally. Why would you trust them? Anyone who trusts in Egypt is like someone who rests his weight on a broken stick and is likely to get it stuck through his arm." And he said, "You know what? We would give you 2,000 horses if you actually had 2,000 healthy people well enough to ride them." And you see the ridicule in that. And then he confuses the issue by saying, it's the Lord who sent my king up here. We have come here by the direction of your God. And so this, of course, is going to introduce an element of confusion, which is effective in diminishing the will to fight and to resist. And he even goes on to say, do not trust your God. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you by saying the Lord will deliver us. And he said, look, surrender to us. If you do, everyone will come out and he will be in his own home. He will eat of his own tree. He will drink his own wine. And until my Lord Sennacherib moves you to a beautiful place where you can live happily ever after. I mean, why would you want to resist us? Because you know it's going to happen. But if you surrender, we'll take you away to a good place. Everybody will be happy. No need for all the gruesome treatment. And finally, he puts this out there. And it's interesting because by this time, the Assyrian Empire has quite a track record of conquering people. And he instills more doubt into the people of Judah by telling them that what good were the gods of these other nations? They couldn't deliver their people out of their hands. What makes you think the Lord can deliver you out of my hand? And that's where we end 2 Kings 18. Well, okay, on to chapter 19. And so Hezekiah is extremely distressed at this point. And Hezekiah and his servants are all wearing sackcloth. And this is a sign of distress. It's a sign of repentance. It's a sign of grief. It's a sign of God save us is part of what's going on here. And so while Hezekiah is king, a prophet whom you know by name, whom you've heard of, the prophet Isaiah, is carrying on his ministry in Jerusalem at the time of King Hezekiah and at the time of the events of the fall of Israel and the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. And so Isaiah gives a short message here: God will deliver. And then the Rabshakeh comes back to the city wall of Jerusalem, and he's trying to remind them, you still can't win. And he repeats some of the same things he's said before. And so this is brought again to the prophet Isaiah, and he says Sennacherib is not a big deal. Now, this is Isaiah, and Isaiah is actually far more poetic and a much better speaker than I'm giving him credit for there. But Isaiah puts it this way: he speaking, the Lord speaking through him says about Sennacherib, "Did you really think that you conquered all of these lands on your own power? Do you not realize I'm the one who sent you? And just who is it that you have blasphemed? It's the Holy One of Israel, and it's not going to go well for you." So this is the message from Isaiah to King Hezekiah, and that is that Sennacherib is going to be turned back. And that night, the angel of the Lord goes over the camp of the Assyrians, and 185,000 Assyrians are killed overnight. So this is a pretty disturbing setback for Sennacherib. And so Sennacherib makes it as far as Jerusalem. He does exact some tribute from Hezekiah. He loses a significant portion of his army, and he's forced to retreat, and he heads back home. Now, what's interesting is an archaeological record of Sennacherib's conquest has been found, and it parallels the scriptural accounts. That he took the nation of Israel, that he succeeded in taking some of the northern cities of Judah, that he laid siege to Jerusalem, that he got tribute from King Hezekiah, and then he says, I overawed Hezekiah and I left. So in Sennacherib's record, he leaves out that detail about 185,000 of his men dying overnight because he happened to blaspheme the self-existent creator God of the universe. So bad move there, Sennacherib. Anyway, Sennacherib goes back to Assyria, and he is worshiping in the temple of Nisroch. Nisroch is one of the Assyrian gods. And while he is worshiping his idol, two of his sons actually come into the temple and kill their dad while he's worshiping Nisroch. And I think you see the irony here when he sent out Rabshakeh to say, do you really think your God can deliver you out of my king's hand? And yes, God did. And not only that, but Nisroch, the chunk of rock that really Sennacherib was worshiping, could do nothing to protect him from his own sons, who assassinated him and then ran out of town, and then another one of his sons became king in his place. So that brings us to the end of 2 Kings 19. Well, on to 2 Kings 23, and how does it end for Hezekiah? Well, Hezekiah becomes deathly ill, and Isaiah the prophet comes to him and informs him bluntly, you will die. And Hezekiah is extremely distressed about this, and he cries out, no, and he prays to the Lord for healing. And then Isaiah returns to him and says, well, the Lord has heard your prayer, you will live. And so Hezekiah wants a sign that he will have some time added to his life. And this has to do with the extending of a shadow on a stairwell somewhere in Jerusalem. And so the question is, shall the shadow go forward 10 steps like it normally does, or will it retreat 10 steps like it normally does? And so what happens is Hezekiah says, well, it usually goes forward 10 steps, make it go backward 10 steps. So Isaiah prays, and the Lord honors that. And so the sun moves in the opposite direction, or the earth moves in the opposite direction, and the shadow that is usually cast going down these steps ends up retreating back up these steps, and that is the miraculous sign by which God indicates that Hezekiah's life will be extended. But Hezekiah does something foolish at the end of his life, and it's sad that someone, again, with such a good reputation, one of Judah's best kings, does something he shouldn't have done, and that is he receives some visitors from Babylon. Now, who are the Babylonians? Well, eventually it's going to be the Babylonians who conquer the Assyrians, and that is a pretty big deal. The Assyrian army is not an easy army to conquer, and the Babylonians manage it. But as the Babylonians at this point are a power secondary to the Assyrians, they send some visitors, some ambassadors to Hezekiah. And so Hezekiah shows these Babylonian ambassadors all of his riches, and they are impressed. And so Hezekiah is sort of showing off, look how wealthy I am, look how many riches I have. And Isaiah has bad news for him. And so Isaiah tells King Hezekiah that everything that you showed to the Babylonians is one day going to end up in Babylon. It's not going to stay here. And all the riches that you have gathered, your fathers have gathered, that your sons will gather, will ultimately come to nothing because of your pride. Hello, Bible fans. This episode is brought to you by little figurines of Georgian Cossack warriors. Isn't that cool? That's actually one my oldest son got for me when he was over in Georgia, the other Georgia, and it's a neat little souvenir to bring back. Well, let's go ahead and head into what's going on in 2 Kings 22. But before we get to 2 Kings 22, we've got to back up just a little bit to 2 Kings 21. Now, what's happening in 2 Kings 21 is we have a king named Ammon. And Ammon he's a bad king. He fits in with all of the kings of Israel and most of the kings of Judah as being one who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord. And Ammon is assassinated. And after his assassination, the people of Judah rise up and kill his conspirators. So here's Ammon's gravestone here, and here are the gravestones of his conspirators. So that coup didn't go very well, did it? But what it does leave us with is the boy king Josiah. And Josiah is going to grow up to be a very important king of Judah. He is 8 years old when he assumes the throne, and this is where 2 Kings 22 begins with the ascension to the throne of King Josiah. And it says in his 18th year. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's the 18th year of his life, in which case he's 18, or is that the 18th year of his reign, in which case he's a young man of 26. Either way, we do know this. He was a good king, and it was on Jeroboam's heart to repair the temple. Remember that Solomon had built the temple, and the temple, well, if you follow the condition of the temple, it's a good indicator of the spiritual condition of the people of Judah. Whatever the temple is being used for is going to be very, very representative of what of where the people of Judah are spiritually. And you're about to find how the temple of the Lord was being used in the next chapter. And you may be a bit surprised to see how badly desecrated it was before Josiah issued his reform. But back to Josiah. While the temple is being repaired, an exciting discovery is made, and that is a scroll of the law of Moses is found. And I don't know how many of these things were left in Judah, but think about that the law of God, what should have been read regularly in the temple, is discovered by accident in the temple renovations. And what happens is Shaphan, who is a scribe, reads the scroll of the law before Jeroboam. And as you'll see here, Jeroboam is deeply distressed as he hears the law of the Lord being read to him, because it contains the blessings for obedience, and it also contains the very, very, very strict warnings for disobedience. And Jeroboam is alarmed when he is made aware of his sin and the sin of the nation of Judah. So some of Jeroboam's men consult the prophetess Huldah, and she says that the Lord has heard you in reference to Josiah, and says that because you repented, because your heart was tender towards the Lord, that you will not see disaster in your day, but that God will delay that disaster for another time. But Josiah's godliness And Josiah's desire to worship the true God brings to his people a few extra years to repent and to get their act together. All right, on to 23. Okay, next up, 2 Kings 23. And here we have Josiah the king in front of the temple of the Lord, and Josiah is reading from the law in the hearing of the people. And there is, after his reading, a moment of repentance, a moment of covenant renewal, and a commitment by the people of Judah to follow and to obey the law of the Lord. And that leads to the cleaning of the temple. And what's happening here is that the temple had been used for years for the worship of false gods. There were Baal idols in there, Asherah poles, which these people here are removing and taking to the valley of Kidron to be burned. There was a good bit of immorality associated with the worship of Canaanite gods, and this was going on in the temple of the Lord. And and a goodly number of things representing astrology and the worship of these false Canaanite gods were cluttering up the temple, and it was necessary for these things to be removed so that the true and right worship of the Lord could be restored and renewed. Now, what happens next, and if you have a good long memory, you'll remember 1 Kings 13. Josiah the king is in Bethel, and he is destroying the altar that Jeroboam, king of Israel, had set up in the days when the kingdom had actually first split. And Josiah is going about destroying the graves of the pagan priests and desecrating their altars. And he sees this monument, and this says, "Rest in peace, unknown prophet." And you see the question mark over his head because Josiah is asking the men around him, "What's that?" And they say, "That is the prophet who predicted that you would come and do this." And so then Josiah gives the order, leave his grave alone, and also leave the grave of the other prophet alone. But everything else is to be torn up and desecrated and disgraced and then disposed of. And then we have the keeping of the Passover. And interestingly enough, Passover had not been kept since the days of the judges. So think about that, from the reigns of Saul, David, Solomon, the split with Jeroboam, Rehoboam, all the way up throughout the history of the kingdom of Israel and their eventual deportation, and now to Josiah. Wow, this is really quite something. The Passover is finally kept for the first time. The Passover was supposed to be kept annually. This was a constant reminder that it was God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. I have delivered you, I have freed you, now you are to worship and to obey me. And it is, of course, the Passover meal that Jesus celebrates when he drops on his disciples that this Passover meal, which had been observed for up to 1400 years before Jesus, was really all about him. And so the restoration of Passover is an important thing, that an important thread that leads back into the New Testament. And then finally, what happens to poor Josiah? He has a bad end. You see an arrow stuck through him here, and he does end tragically. He goes out to battle against Necho, who is the Pharaoh of Egypt. And not a lot is known about him, but Necho is actually one of the few pharaohs mentioned by name in the scriptures. Pharaoh is a title. It simply means big cheese of Egypt. And the name Necho actually gives us somebody that archaeologists and so on can look up and try to find. So we do have a named pharaoh. So historically, that's interesting. But what happens is this: Necho warns, and you'll see this when you follow the parallel account in Second Chronicles. Necho warns Josiah that he has been commanded by God to do what he's about to do, and Josiah is not to interfere. Josiah does not heed the warning, and Josiah is killed in battle. So that was a sad end, because otherwise Josiah was an excellent king. He was one of the best of the godliest kings of Judah. And in just a moment of foolishness, he ends up getting himself killed unnecessarily in battle. But anyway, that's the end of Josiah, and very shortly it's going to be the end of the kingdom of Judah. Okay, let's finish 2 Kings 24 and 25. Now, to give you an idea here, now at this point, we've moved forward a couple of hundred years since the days of King Hezekiah, the conquest of Israel, the miraculous deliverance of the city of Jerusalem. That was back in the 700s of BC. Now we've come up to around 586 BC, and we have King Nebuchadnezzar, who is now king of Babylon. And Babylon is the big kid on the block now in ancient history. They are the big empire. And so the King Nebuchadnezzar brings his troops into Jerusalem. Now, during this time, there's a couple of things going on. First of all, we have here the city of Jerusalem, and at this time, the prophet Jeremiah is prophesying in Jerusalem. And then we have here a number of Jews have already been deported to Babylon. Babylon is in modern-day Iraq. Now, the country of Iraq did not exist in 586 BC, but the city of Babylon did, and the city of Babylon is in what is today Iraq. So, who's there? Well, in Babylon, with the exiled Jews, is Ezekiel prophesying. And if you read Ezekiel and Jeremiah, bear in mind that they are prophesying at the same time with very much the same message, but in two different locations. So try to remember Jeremiah, Jerusalem, and Ezekiel, exile, and that'll help keep straight who's who during this time. Well, now the Babylonians have come to Jerusalem, and cut a long story short, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has made Zedekiah king of Judah. Now, Zedekiah is not a real king. He's not a legitimate king, but he has been put in charge by Nebuchadnezzar, and as a puppet king. And there's an exchange between King Zedekiah and the prophet Jeremiah. Remember Jeremiah, Jerusalem. And this is where Zedekiah is as king of Judah. And he says, "What should I do?" And Jeremiah tells him, "You need to surrender." And Zedekiah thinks it over and says, no, I really can't do that. And so Zedekiah has foolishly decided, as someone very unable to finish the task, to rebel against the most powerful king in the Middle East, Nebuchadnezzar. And it goes very, very, very badly for Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar comes to conquer the city of Jerusalem, this time to break down the walls. And one day, Nebuchadnezzar is sitting in the city gate of Jerusalem. Whoever is in the city gate is the authority of that city. And so times have changed, and suddenly Jerusalem has become a vassal city-state under King Nebuchadnezzar, even more so than it already was. And so Zedekiah makes a run for it. He is captured. And it goes badly for him because Zedekiah is brought before King Nebuchadnezzar in Jerusalem. and Zedekiah's sons are executed in front of Zedekiah, and then the Babylonians put his eyes out. So it really, really is a horrifying bad ending for Zedekiah. The last thing he sees is his sons being put to death, and then he's blinded, and and then King Nebuchadnezzar goes to work. Executing the leadership of the kingdom of Judah, and then gets to work on deportation. And so the just like the people of Israel were deported by the Assyrians, so now the people of Judah are going to be deported by the Babylonians, and they're going to be moved into a foreign land. Again, with the hope that the next generation of Jews will become so culturally Babylonian that they will be faithful citizens and not a source of rebellion. But this isn't the end of Judah. Judah will return, and it is awesome how God brings that about. But where do we end chapter 25 of 2 Kings? We end with the temple being pillaged by the Babylonians. And so the Babylonians remove the articles of worship of the true God from the temple in Jerusalem. And this is going to figure in the book of Daniel, when Belshazzar takes the articles of the temple of the Lord that were taken from Jerusalem, and he uses them in the worship of false gods. And this is when he sees the mysterious hand writing on the wall. And more about that when we get to Daniel. But that's the end of Judah. And for the same reasons that it was with Israel, they persisted in their sin. They were more likely to be worshiping false gods than the true God. God sent prophet after prophet after prophet to warn them. They refused, they refused, they refused. Prophets were ignored. Prophets were mistreated. Prophets were sometimes murdered. And finally, God's patience comes to an end. And that's it for the city of Jerusalem and the people of Judah for now.